Thank you to 12th Street Sound for sponsoring today's episode. If you're an artist and you want your next recordings to stand up to the best of the best, you need to learn more about 12th Street Sound, a recording studio in my home city, New Westminster, BC. 12th Street provides the value and bang for your buck that you can only get from a boutique studio. That's why I keep choosing Anthony Senarini at 12th Street Sound as my recording and mix engineer for my own music, released as William Chernoff. Anthony and the team are collectors and restoration specialists obsessed with music and recording equipment. When I go into the studio, I get more than just great service. I get the space to craft my story as an artist. You deserve the same as you work on your new music for 2022. Whether you need pre-production, tracking, mixing, or full production services, check out 12th Street Sound today and tell Anthony about your next project. Learn more at 12thstreet.ca. That's 12thst.ca.
This was the end of '94. It was snowing that day. And I remember slipping on the sidewalk outside. I landed on my on my back pretty softly in the snow. It's Regina. And looking up at the snow coming down and just thinking, wow, what am I going to do next? Like, what a situation I've got myself into.
Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Will Chernoff, and you're listening to the Rhythm Changes podcast, a home for creative, improvising, local music people. With Rhythm Changes, we're striving to make the best possible interview show about a music scene. So if you're joining us for the first time, whether from Vancouver, BC, elsewhere in Canada, or across the world, get involved today with a visit to our website, rhythmchanges.ca. Our guest today has worked as a session vocalist, as a recording artist under his own name, and as a choral singer, and he released his latest album, I Will, on November 26th, 2021. You can hear him perform with Bill Kuhn on guitar and Renee Wurst on bass at Frankie's on Sunday, January 23rd, or at the Second Floor Gastown on Sunday, February 6th. And you can find his album for sale at carmanjprice.bandcamp.com. So please welcome to the Rhythm Changes podcast, Carman J. Price.
Thanks so much for having me, Will. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Now, I want to first ask about the Beatles. The title track of your album, I Will, is a Beatles song.
Yeah.
I need to know, because of that, who your favorite Beatle is.
If I had to pick one, it's probably Paul. That's definitely where my sensibilities lie, for sure. My daughter's favorite is probably Ringo.
Oh, yeah. So all the Beatles songs are credited to both Lennon and McCartney, right? The ones that were written by either one of them. So
that's right.
Do you know who wrote that particular song, I Will?
That one would be a Paul song, for sure. One of my favorite tunes from Hard Day's Night, If I Fell, which you'd think is totally a Paul song, is apparently a John song.
Okay.
Also a really lovely melodic tune, one of my faves.
Other than that Beatles song, how did you choose the repertoire for this album?
Some of them would have been in my book already for a number of years. A few I specifically chose because there was some connection to my wedding day. The album, I Will, was recorded on the occasion of my 10th wedding anniversary, and it sort of acts as a sequel of sorts to my first album, I Do, which was recorded as a surprise wedding gift for my wife. I managed to record it without her knowing, presented it, the box of CDs, had it brought to Heritage Hall where we got married, and during the wedding reception, I sprung it on her. So that was pretty cool. And anyway, so 10 years have gone by, and I thought it was time to do a follow-up. So there's a couple of tunes on the album that relate to my wedding day. The opening tune, Just in Time, was our recessional song. We had the wonderful Jennifer Scott, my dear friend, sing us down the aisle. There's a tune the great Tommy Wolfe wrote, this really cute song called You Smell So Good, and that's the song that we sang to each other.
I love that.
We sang it during the reception. We figured, well, we couldn't sing anything, we barely got through the ceremony without crying in the first place. We certainly were not going to be able to sing something to each other. So we sang this silly song at the reception, and then so that was a lot of fun. And one song that hadn't been in my book at that time, but I just fell in love with it on the day, was That's All. During the reception, we had a bit of an open jam. So we had a few people come up to sing and call a tune with the band. And Kate Hammett-Vaughan, my dear friend, called the tune That's All. And I knew it on the day. I knew it before, but man, those lyrics really hit very differently on that day, on my wedding day. And I just thought, oh, that's a great tune.
Yeah, I want to talk about Bill Kuhn because we know him, we love him. He's one of the most treasured jazz musicians around. And you have had Bill as a band member for a while, and I think that's a rather enviable position. So what is it like having Bill Kuhn as a band member?
Oh, it is a very enviable position. It's fantastic. He's really one of the greatest accompanists. Like he's so much more than an accompanist. He really works with such a great musician to work with singers, because he has so much experience, but he's also, because he's a great arranger and composer himself, his mind works on so many different levels at the same time. And he's just such a sweet cat. I would have loved to have asked him to arrange some things, but his arranger's ear is always going, he'd gently suggest, I kind of like this little chord sequence here, in this turnaround, or how about we do this for an intro? And it's always just so tasty, and it's really, really wonderful. I definitely feel so fortunate to get to make music with him at any level.
Yeah. So then I'm curious about Rene too, because one of the great guests that I had in the previous year of the podcast was Darlene Cooper and Bill Sample with their group Wild Blue Herons, and Bill and Darlene have had some playing history with Rene too. So how'd you start playing with Rene?
I think I probably would have played with him for the first time with Jen Scott. I think she might have hired me for a gig. There was a time where she was running an after-work sort of happy hour thing at the Vancouver Club, which is this very fancy place downtown. Just pay a membership to belong, and Wednesday nights 5 to 7, and we'd play. So she was in charge of, she'd play there, but she was also in charge of curating and asking some of her friends to come and play as well. So she asked me. I think it was probably my first gig with them. And he's just such a great guy and such a great hang. He's got the best stories. If you ever get a chance to have him here in this room, you'll have to do like a 2-part episode. He's just got the best stories. I knew his name before I even moved here because I knew that he was in the band Skywalk. And so, just seeing his name, I knew he was a heavy, heavy cat. But, after getting to work with him and getting to know him, he's just such a great, generous musician, just a sweet, sweet person. I count myself so lucky to have him in my musical life.
Yeah. So let's take it back several years and let's think about moving here, because you brought it up and I'm really curious about that. So you moved from Regina, Saskatchewan to here in the early 2000s, and you enrolled at Capilano University, as me and many of my guests have been to as students, as a vocalist. So what was Capilano University like in the early 2000s?
I was 28 at the time. I came sort of in the middle of the semester. It was January 2001. It was a really good time for me to come here. My younger brother, Lane Price, was going there. I would talk to him on the phone, and he's like, "Man, this is for you. You should be here." And I was working at a dinner theater at the time in Regina, in this place called Applause, Feast and Folly. And I was just thinking, what was next? Not even that I was so interested in becoming like a soloist or like a jazz artist or anything like that. But I just wanted to do something to tune up my ears, just, to maybe go somewhere to get some more musical education. I think I had in mind that I wanted to be like a background singer or a side player more than anything. Like I remember thinking, seeing videos of James Taylor in concert and thinking, well, how could I be, one of his background singers? Not necessarily James Taylor, but I'm like, okay, David Lasley, one of his background singers. I'm like, how do I get that gig? Like, how do you be him? Like, lots of people would want to be, I want to be a music star. I want to write my own songs. I'm like, no, I want to be like David Lasley.
That's a really interesting question. Yeah.
So how do you do that? Like, how do you get your musicianship up enough or get to know people so that you're in the position to get that call?
I'm wondering now what you think about that. What are the skills that you need to be a successful background singer at the highest level? What do you think?
I think you just need to pursue anything that's interesting to you. If you have a chance to take the opportunity to pursue it, you should do so. I was glad to, get that theory happening, and my ear training especially. For a vocalist, that's just absolutely paramount importance. I had so many good experiences, learning a lot of rep really fast, especially getting to be in Nightcap, the vocal group with Réjean Miroir at the helm there. We learned a lot of tough stuff and had to do it very quickly. So I ended up learning just how to make it happen, or just put in the extra hours. And the more I would do it, and the more new music, the more charts I'd attack, then it would become easier. I ended up, of course, singing choral music. So that's been a sight reading and ear training experience just in and of itself. And that's been a big part of my life the last 20 years for sure.
Yeah. So a couple more questions about the album. One of them has to do with your influences. And when I was checking out who you name as your influences on your website, carmanjprice.com, or on your Bandcamp, you talk about Nat Cole. And that's funny because I have a friend who was actually the first ever guest on the Rhythm Changes podcast, Ilhan Safarali, who's younger than me and he lives in New York. He felt like Nat Cole was kind of underappreciated by people of our generation, maybe. And he was wondering who out there are the young jazz musicians that are influenced by Nat King Cole. So was he a big influence on you as a vocalist? And what do you love about him?
I remember when I was just getting into jazz and buying jazz albums, like in late 80s, early 90s, his daughter Natalie Cole had a huge success with her album Unforgettable, where she did, a whole album of tunes that were mostly associated with him and did that one virtual duet with him as well. That's an album I learned a lot of those songs from. But listening to Nat King Cole, he's definitely a musician where just as a singer, he's been, a big influence on me. His impeccable taste. And I think people don't, because most of the famous recordings are of his later years, unless you really are paying attention, you don't realize like what an influential pianist he was. And like he was a big influence on Oscar Peterson. And if you hear some of those recordings from like Jazz at the Philharmonic, there's, a number of famous recordings from those years where he was playing with all these heavy cats, and he's just tearing it up. Like if he didn't sing at all, he would have been a very famous jazz musician that would be deeply influential instead of being more to singing than playing. But yeah, he's a big influence in that his art was just so tasty and swinging. And yeah, it's hard to describe exactly how he made it look so easy. And he's been a big influence on people that I was listening to for the first time when I was just getting into jazz, like Diana Krall, who released this great album called All For You, that's an all Nat King Cole tribute. And John Pizzarelli, who's one of my huge favorites, who's like deeply influenced by Nat King Cole. All like, he's done a few specific Nat records, but he's in every note he plays for sure.
Yeah, somebody else who excels both singing and on his instrument for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, John Pizzarelli is another one that I really dig, where he just chooses such good songs too. Every time he has a new record out, I always am interested to know what he's recorded and like the kind of standards that he likes to do. I mean, he's a child of 70s pop music, and so he's done recently an all Paul McCartney tribute album, like post-Beatles stuff. He's also done a Beatles album. And there was one cool album he did called Double Exposure that has a Billy Joel song on it, and James Taylor. John Pizzarelli's actually worked with him, so that's a lot of stuff, touchstones that hit me right where I live.
But has John Pizzarelli ever sang backing vocals for James Taylor?
Yeah. He plays. Well, maybe he doesn't sing on that. He plays guitar on this track called Mean Old Man from October Road album from 2002, and has worked with him a couple of times. Yeah.
So David Sekula at Demitone Studios recorded and mixed and mastered your album. He took care of all the audio production. I've worked with him on one of my projects too, called Quartet Reunion. So what was your experience working with Dave Sekula?
Oh, fabulous. I've always enjoyed him just as a player, but I'd never had a chance to work with him myself. Him being such a good musician himself, his ears are wide open. And I mean, the way we recorded it, it was just, sort of one day. I tried to make it a little smoother than the last time. When we recorded I Do, it was very quick. I just sort of booked 4 hours, and we ended up, I just thought, I don't know. I didn't have much experience, being in the studio or anything. So I thought, well, I'll book 4 hours and see what we can get done. We ended up recording 13 tunes that day in 2011. Definitely felt like a bit of a grind at the end. So I wanted it to be a little easier than that. So I did fewer tunes, a little longer. Yeah, it ended up being a really good day. So Dave took all the mixing and mastering, and it's just been a delight to work with.
Okay, so one more time for the people in the back. On your first album, I Do, you did 13 tracks in 4 hours?
we did, yeah. I'm not sure why I felt that was necessary, but I just sort of kept going, and I probably just did all the ones I had in mind. We did take a bit of a break after 2.5 hours, just to sit and have a drink and everything. But we just wanted to see what we could get done. That we recorded that at Brad Turner's studio, and he was so nice. He did that all, the mixing and everything for that. And in fact, he on the day when I got there, he was like, I just wanted to say, because I was, the wedding was like in a month. Like the turnaround time was crazy quick.
Wow.
Like a month and a bit to like having an actual CD in my hand on the wedding day. So when I got there, Brad had everything set up and he says, you don't have to say yes. He says, but I just thought if you were into it, I'd be happy to, as a wedding present, to play on a few tracks if that fits your vibe. And I was like, yes, that would be absolutely fantastic. So he actually plays on two of the tracks on that first album, on The Touch of Your Lips and the last track, When Lights Are Low. So that was a big highlight for me for that experience.
So one of the things that I noticed was on the first track of your new album, I Will, Just in Time, it talks about a relationship, but some of the lyrics kind of talk about overcoming doubt. I think that's an important topic for musicians. So can you talk about how you deal with the self-doubt that comes with being a music student?
So I graduated high school in 1990. And then after that, I actually took a few extra classes just to sort of, I wasn't ready to sort of leave the nest. But fall of 91, I started a music education degree. And I remember like the guidance counselor who was, trying to help us decide what to study, what to do later after high school, saying, well, just think about the subjects that you have that you really like the best. Like if you are really into physics, you could, study engineering or science or anything like that. And I was thinking, subjects I like the best. Well, really the only subjects that I really love are just being in choir and band and drama. And I can't be in choir for a living, can I? I mean, as it turns out, I sort of have been, but that's what I thought. And I thought, well, I don't want to, I didn't think that I should just continue to study music and just have some idea of being a performer. I couldn't quite picture how that would work. So I thought, well, being a teacher, that's something that people do. It's something responsible. So I entered the University of Regina and did a year. It was kind of limped to the finish that first year. Took a year off and then came back and did this one education class. I had to do it twice. And then on my third year, I finally got around to the second year education class that was sort of a mini practicum. Like I was doing fine in all the music classes mostly, but again, it was doing classical stuff that I was, not as skilled at the time. And the education class, the practicum, this is where we'd actually spend like a day in an actual classroom. So I remember having to prepare lessons, and every Wednesday morning, it was Wednesdays, I remember getting to this elementary school in Regina at like 8:00 and going into the teacher's lounge and going over my poorly prepared, notes and lesson plan and just feeling ill and like just having such a terrible time. And I put so much effort into that class that I sort of let my other classes fall by the wayside, and I ended up failing everything, and including this one, this big class it was just pass fail. So you didn't get a grade at the end of it. You're just like, we recommend you to go on to the next year. And I remember being in the class in the room with my professor. We had sort of a one-on-one at the end of the semester, and she told me that I didn't pass. And I remember just, okay, well that makes sense. I would do that too. And just sort of talking with her like very calmly. But then I was also, my eyes were welling up, and she could tell I was really upset. And I remember her asking me, is someone, she goes, I don't want to get into this, but is someone at home making you do this? Or I said,
Whoa.
Well, no, but I don't know what else to do. I guess I couldn't picture what else there was for me. And I remember like leaving that day. This was the end of 94. It was snowing that day. And I remember slipping on the sidewalk outside, and I landed on my back pretty softly in the snow. It's Regina. And looking up at the snow coming down and just thinking, wow, what am I going to do next? Like, what a situation I've got myself into. It ended up being a good thing for me to do this dinner theater thing for the next couple of years. I did a few shows the summer of 94 and then continued on. I ended up doing 16 shows there over the course of those 7 years. And it actually was a really good experience because, I ended up having to learn lots of different kinds of music. The run would go for 2 months, and each show was like it's a very specific parameters. So it'd have to be 2 acts. In each act, you'd have to have some contrivance where you bring up somebody from the audience. And so lots of improv throughout, and it'd have to be like 5 or 6 people in the cast. And each one was themed. Like one show would be an all country theme. One show would be all 50s music, or some guy who's an Elvis impersonator for some reason. I don't know. That turned out a lot. But then we did a couple of more interesting ones later on. There was a folk music one, and one where we were in Las Vegas. So just sort of, we could do almost anything in that one. But doing lots of different kinds of music was a really good experience. The music director, Dave Shabbat, just such a positive influence on my life. If there's anything you can take from this whole interview is for you to look up Dave Shabbat. And he plays with Jack Semple Band in Regina, and he's a fabulous, fabulous bass player, fabulous singer, plays great guitar. And during these years when he was the music director at Applause, when we had a live band, he would do that. And then there was a bunch of years where we did all recorded tracks. So he did all the tracks, and then in our rehearsal period, like he would be the one that would teach us everything. So I just got so much from him. And he was actually the one at the end of it in the fall of 2000 when I had to do my audition. I didn't come out to Vancouver to do my audition for CAP. I recorded it in his home studio, and he did it all for me. I didn't know what I should be doing for this audition. I picked two standards. I picked Almost Like Being in Love and My Romance, and I just sort of handed them to him. I didn't have sheet music, so he just lifted them from the recordings that I gave him, and he was just so great, and just such a great guy. Dave Shabbat. Love you, man.
Oh, I will do that for sure. I will check him out. So that is kind of the period where you dealt with a whole bunch of things and you ended up here. And
yeah.
This is probably something that you've done in the ensuing years, like a part of your career since you've been living and working in the Vancouver area, is you have experience recording jingles and working on commercials. And I have never interviewed somebody who has done that. So can you talk at all about what that is like?
I haven't done that much here. I did a bit in Regina.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think you could probably talk to somebody who has a little bit more experience doing that, like Steve Maddock, or I think definitely the glory years of like going into other people's studios doing jingles is gone. They used to do like I think back in the 80s and 90s you could be like a jingle singer or backup singer and do a lot of studio work throughout the year, but I think most people do that in-house these days.
Yeah.
But I definitely have memories of doing like very on the fly sort of vocal harmonies in studios, in some situations, and doing a couple of things like just spoken ads as well for SaskTel and various other things that I did.
So that was something you did during this period where you were finding your way. Another thing that was going on. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the other things I got from my time in Applause is because, I'm more of a introverted type of person. So being forced to do the theater thing, and particularly dinner theater, where you have to do improv basically the whole night. And we served the patrons their dinner like in character and took their orders and everything like that. By the end, I was doing all I would do the opening speech and the closing speech, and then during dinner in the intermission part, we'd also, like anybody that had a birthday, we'd get them up and do some ridiculous thing with them. And I was doing all that stuff. And I looking back now, I can hardly believe that I had that much energy to to do all that stuff. But it was really good to have that experience, so that like now when I have to do solo gigs at Frankie's or wherever, I feel comfortable introducing tunes and talking about myself and the music and whatever, and just being in front of an audience. Corey actually got me to MC a bunch over the years as well, both at the Cellar and at Frankie's. So I feel pretty comfortable talking in front of an audience. And I think I have my years at Applause to thank for that, for sure.
Speaking of performing in front of a live audience, so when you do your gigs coming up at Frankie's and at the Second Floor Gastown, what else is in your book? What else are you going to play in addition to the repertoire that's on the album, I Will?
Well, I always like to get a chance to play some extra stuff. I'll do stuff from the album for sure, and a lot of choice standards that I like to do. I like to do some sort of instrumental pieces as well. Like one drag about being a singer in jazz is that you rarely get called to be a side player, to be a sideman. And one of my favorite songs that I like to do is Dave Frischberg's I Want to Be a Sideman, where he sings, I want to sleep in the afternoons and let the leader call all the tunes. I want to be young. I want to have fun. I want to be a sideman.
This is another thing I have to check out.
And you never get a chance to, like, if I was a bass player or a sax player, I'd get, you get a call. Hey, I've got this project. I want you to be in my band for this gig or whatever. And you rarely you basically that never happens. It seems like maybe there's a bit of a trend. I want to like just put it out there. Maybe this would be a trend for creative jazz musicians like Jody Prosnick with her recent Sun Songs album, where she, came up with all this repertoire and wrote these lyrics, a few with some co-writers, but, it's very much a very personal artistic statement that she's made on her album. And Amanda Tosoff's recent 2 albums,
Earth Voices and Words,
where she's got this recent Earth Voices album in particular is just an amazing piece of work. It's got her typical great compositions and arrangements and everything, but she's got a real amazing all-star cast of her favorite vocalists in Toronto, and it's a terrific project. Anyway, if that can be a continued trend for like creative writers in jazz to do their own thing and then hire other vocalists, I'm definitely in favor of that idea.
You're talking about somebody who's primarily an instrumentalist who puts together a vocal project.
Yeah.
Also as a composer.
Yeah, definitely. That would be very cool to be part of something that's, some new tunes, some new compositions, or whatever. If somebody's like decided, if Bill wanted to do, a tribute to Nat King Cole or whoever, and he didn't have Denzel Sinclair around, he's like, oh, we should do this show. And Carman, you want to? Steve also isn't around, and I seem to get a lot of gigs because Steve Maddock's not available. But in those situations, I would love to be on the. I think I am on the list anyway. That was the goal when I moved here 20 years ago, is to just be in somebody's mind of like, if we need a vocalist for this, then I want people to have me in mind anyway.
To get on the list.
Yeah.
I want to close by talking about movies, because you have been to film festivals, you've vlogged about movies, you were enchanted by going to the theater as a kid. So I know you have this love of movies, and I know that you said you even used to like keep track of all the movies you saw and rated them. So like, how has your life as a movie fan been going in the recent years?
Well, recently, once Parenthood hit, it's definitely
it changes the kind of movies, right?
It took a bit of a turn. Like my wife and I were big movie fans, and like for our honeymoon, we went to the Telluride Film Festival and saw, over that Labor Day weekend, we saw I think 14 films.
Nice.
And we always would try what's called the Oscar death race. So when the Oscar nominations come out, and then you've got 4 or 6 weeks to try and watch
all?
Not just the Best Picture or the acting nominees, but like everything, like all the shorts,
all the nominees
for costume design, sound, whatever. Never quite did it, but out of like 55 nominees, we could usually get within 10 or 15, something like that. And we haven't really, of course, since becoming parents, that hasn't really been something we've been able to accomplish. But the last few years, we've been able to get back into at least watching all the Best Picture nominees. Yeah, I'm a huge movie fan. One of my big things that I love is having. I'm still attached to the cable. We haven't cut the cord, and so we subscribe to TCM, Turner Classic Movies. So I'm always watching older films, and I'm always fascinated by, especially getting to see movies where some of the standards that I love come from originally. Right. Like especially if it's something that's really off the beaten path, like. There's a movie called Sun Valley Serenade where Chattanooga Choo Choo comes from, and it's set in a sort of a ski resort, and Harry Warren wrote all the songs for this movie. So the song's called I Know Why and So Do You, and it just sort of glancingly mentions snowfall and things like that. So I love including a song like that in like my Christmas repertoire. So like Violets for Your Furs, and there's this real rarity that I heard Cecile McLaren-Salvant do called It's Easy to Blame the Weather. And the only other recording I could find was Billie Holiday, and that's probably where she got it. But it's a real choice, Saul Chaplin, Sammy Kahn tune, that again, it's just talking about snowflakes and things like that. So it's a great off-kilter choice for a Christmas show. I love that.
Well, Carman, you have a lot of personality as a singer. I really enjoyed your album, and thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much for asking me. This has been a great honor, and I hope to do it again sometime.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Rhythm Changes podcast. If you haven't followed the show yet, make sure you do, and tell your friends who might enjoy listening too. Link them to our website, rhythmchanges.ca, Facebook at Chernoff Music, or Instagram and Twitter at Rhythm Changes BC. The Rhythm Changes podcast is a Chernoff Music production. See show notes for full production credits. Copyright 2022 Chernoff Music.